resources, inspiring interviews, business practices, and practical advice to take your art career to the next level. Join Sergio Gomez in today's Artist Next Level and get ready to take control of your career.
Well, hello, my friends. Welcome back here. I'm super excited to be here with you today. And I'm here with my friend, Salvador Cicero. He's an attorney at law. And we're going to talk about how to organize your art business the right way.
Good morning in this beautiful cold morning in Chicago.
I know, right? And super happy to have you here. Thank you so much for making time in your schedule. I know in your busy Zoom schedule, probably, as you are an attorney dealing with all kinds of cases on a regular basis. But I'm also very excited that you're here, not only because you are a great attorney and you have a great information to share with our friends, but you also are an art supporter. You've been to many of my shows. You actually have collected my art as well, and that of many other artists as well that I know too. And so, you know, for that reason, it's even more of a pleasure to have you here because you can give us a good help to all the Breakfast with Sergio artists who watch it faithfully and who may have, you know, right now this issue of how should I organize my art business correctly or legally, right? Because there's also the non-legally way to do it. So before we talk about that, Salvador, tell us a little bit about you and why you love art so much.
Well, I mean, art has been part of my life since I was born. My father was a painter. My mother was a soprano.
I didn't know that.
Yes, I went to the conservatory. You can probably see the piano behind me. So I write music, and well, you've heard my music, so you know, always sharing art. So when you are an artist of sorts, you understand the need to create, right? It's something that's within you, and when you see something that strikes you, they say that art is not just creating, but if you're able to convey a feeling and somebody understands that. So that's why I love visual art as well as music. So
that's great. Did your parents were surprised when you said I want to be a lawyer?
No, my dad was on the other way. My dad was like, no, you gotta go to law school, and you can do the music thing too. So it was very rough. In fact, my little daughter just got into merit school of music, so she's struggling with that. School full time and conservatory full time. So but it is what it is. You got to be who you are. So
that's awesome. I love that story. Now I know more about you now after this conversation. That's great. Well, let's talk a little bit about, you know, how as artists should we organize our art business, right? Because that's part of a greater conversation where I have opportunity to work with many artists, as you know, too, in my coaching program. And sometimes I, you know, get to work with artists who have never taken the time to really organize their art career correctly in terms of the legal stance, and that also affects how they run, you know, their business, because they cannot run contracts or agreements or all those things that, you know, just one problem rolls into the next. So maybe you can help us with a good start on an artist who may want to get started on this.
Well, I think that first of all, I think I need to share with you that we are all the same. Artists, lawyers, architects, we know what we do, right? So lawyers, for example, learn all about business law, and then their firms are a mess, right? It takes time. Any business, whatever the business is, you gotta organize. So if you're in this position, don't feel bad. You're not alone. Okay. With artists, I think the one issue, because as you know, we do represent a few artists as well. It's always this idea that no, I'm just a creator, right? I create and I put out. Yes, but the thing is, you actually make a living. When you make a decision to do this as a business for yourself, then you have to take the responsibility to yourself and to your family to do it properly. So that's the first step. You got to convince yourself that, yes, you are let me take an example that I'm sure everybody knows, right? Like Brito. You may or may not like Romero Brito's art, but I think that we can all agree that he's got a business model that works for him, right? And he's got professional, of course, you know, he's at a point in time in his career where he can afford to hire people to do things for him, right? I happen to be very good friends with a former director of his gallery in Miami. And so I've seen the struggle from my friend's side, right? So everybody has that tension between the creation and the business side. So the thing is, you look at people like that and you're like, well, how did they get there? Well, you know, they hire publicists to do that, but the basis has to be there. before we started the podcast, Sergio and I were just chatting, and we were talking about the issues that we all face when it comes to paying taxes, for example.
Right.
So let's start with a couple of things. The first thing you have to decide is, once you start selling your art, is how are you going to pay the taxes on it, right? And the first mistake people make is not create a simple corporation, right? These days, you can have a corporate, even a limited liability corporation company, right? LLCs that everybody I'm sure has heard of. You can have one for $150. That's the filing fee, right? Now, you should first talk to your accountant. You have to have an accountant. If you're going to do this, you're going to be dealing with galleries, or doing your solo shows with the gallery. You need to have an idea of how this works. You can't just be going to H&R Block. And I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying, you need to understand what are the consequences of somebody paying you $5,000 for a piece of art, or $500 for a piece of art, right? Because there is a portion of that. Now, if you have a corporation, the corporation can take a number of deductions and costs, and it doesn't flow straight to you. So that right off the bat, you need to have that, right? The other reason is, when you start doing deals with people, it's better to have an in-between. So you create the corporation that you manage, and that allows you to have deals with galleries. Because let's say that you get into a deal with a gallery, and then you have a legal problem. They either don't pay you, or they want to give you all the tax liability, right? Or they sue you. It's better to have them sue the corporation, and if things don't work out for you, that goes bankrupt, your corporation, and the corporation goes bankrupt, not you.
So pardon me for the interrupting. So in a way, the LLC protects your personal assets, correct?
Absolutely.
To a point.
Absolutely. And there's always a tension between your protection, your assets, and what's the best way to reduce your income tax. Okay. So it's not a solve all situation with an LLC necessarily. Okay. Excuse me, but I will tell you this: you definitely need to think asset protection first and taxation second, right?
Okay.
So that's what's important. Plus, if you have a corporation, you can buy a car, you can start building your corporation, and you can do this all at the same time that you do. Now, the other thing, I think, once you have your corporation, I think the biggest mistake that I see artists make is not investing time in reviewing their contracts. Right?
Yeah.
They're like, they just go and make a deal with a gallery, and then they sign some papers, and like, well, what were the terms?
Right.
Well, I don't know. Really? You know? Well, I thought it was going to get 50-50. Yeah, but there's a clause that says that you also have to pay for all the advertising, and you have to pay for all the promotion. And then that we threw a cocktail party for you. You got to pay for that. Like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's more of a mindset. I guess my biggest piece of advice for our listeners today is you need to have an entrepreneurial mindset. And I think that's something that you consistently are talking about in your podcast, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think you're totally right, because, and also there's also the instances in which you do a handshake agreement with a gallery or with someone, somebody who's going to do something for you, but that handshake means absolutely nothing, in the legal scenario, right? If something were to happen, who said what? Well, I don't know. I think,
there's two levels. There's two levels, right? Because there is the level of you as a business person investing the time in getting to know the people you're going to do business with, right? We, in legal terms, would call that due diligence. Who is this person? Have they always gone through with their contracts, right? Because even having it in writing doesn't guarantee much sometimes. But you should do this. This is the rule, though. Anything above $500 needs to be in writing. Any deal over $500 needs to be in writing to be enforceable. Okay?
That's great. That's a great
right off the bat, you need to know that, if your intent is to sell it for $1,000 or more, it has to be in writing.
Exactly.
And of course, here's the thing where people get into trouble also. Let's say that you are sending your art somewhere else, right? Like you have a contract with a gal, you're in Chicago, and you're, selling some of your art in Miami. And then you send it out. All kinds of things can happen, right? It can burn down, or the plane can crash, or the van get lost, or somebody steals the stuff. that's one thing. So that needs to be very clearly spelled out. Who pays for the freight, right? All of those things are very important. And if it's international, it's even more important.
Even,
because there are rules as to what can come in and come out. So that is a very tricky thing sometimes, because these are complex contracts. So you need to find an attorney. Now, when it comes to finding attorneys, not every attorney is going to know how to help you. Okay. So when you talk to attorneys, you need to ask them, you have business law background, right? What kind of business background, what kind of businesses do you represent? Do you know anything about copyright law or not? Because remember, people think that attorneys do everything. We don't all do everything, right? So a firm like ours that does a lot of stuff that has to do with the music industry and painters and things like that, right? So we've developed relationships with other firms that have, like I have my guy who works at a larger firm who does all of the copyright registrations and trademarks.
Oh, okay.
And that's all that guy does. Right? I do the business side, I organize it, and I've learned enough to see what we need to do so that I can direct to where it needs to go. Right? We have the litigation guy that does the litigations, and then we have the guy who only does copyright. So what you need really is a good legal advisor who can walk you through all these things and review your contracts.
Right. And because also like laws may vary from state to state, right? So it's important, like if you need a contract, particularly something complex, you don't just go to Google and see what you can find and just, use it and send it out. But I'm always asking artists, make sure that you go with, somebody can give you legal advice where you are in the world, where you are in the state and the city, because laws can change.
Let me say something about that. And I'm going to share the trick that we use, right?
Okay.
Because I think this is important for people.
Yeah.
If you're going to, as you grow as an artist, your art is going to go everywhere, right? So your contract, you should invest in a contract that you have to give people, not wait for the gallery to give you the contract, okay? Because who do you think that contract's going to favor?
Yeah, always the one who writes it, right?
So it's always better to say, oh, I'm interested in doing this with you. Here's my contract. And then you send it to them. And that contract should be a fair contract, right? It should be a contract that protects them and protects you. Because if it's not designed that way, they're not going to want to sign that contract, right?
Right.
So it needs to be fair. And so when I design contracts, I try to make them fair. But here is the part where you definitely need to make sure you put this in a contract, which is if you live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, you better make the venue for any dispute Tulsa, Oklahoma. That way, you know that it doesn't matter where you're selling this thing. Everybody has to agree that the venue and the disputes will be in the place where you live, because you can defend it where you live. You don't have to be paying some guy in New York City to go defend a case that has a venue in New York City that was sold in California. Right.
That's a great point. I had never heard about that one before, and talked to so many also attorneys in the podcast. That is a first. That is a very interesting. So when you are reviewing a contract, even that somebody gives you, you can look for those things.
Oh, you should. That's what you're looking for, because look. Let's be realistic about how the industry works, right? You go with a larger gallery, they're not going to negotiate all the points in their contract with you, right? It's kind of like take it or leave it kind of situation many times.
Right. Most
like
of the time,
you cannot, that you cannot negotiate. Oh, well, I only want to pay 20%. Well, everybody pays 20%. So you got, well, I wish you were 20%.
Right? From what year is that contract?
50%. But excuse me. What I'm saying is that you can say, but you can also say, look, I'm not going to go fight this out over there. Or at least, well, if I get into an issue with this company that is in Florida, right? The example we use, then I know right off the bat that if I have a problem, I'm going to have to go defend this in Florida. So at the very least, your attorney needs to educate you as to what are the venues that you're going to be dealing. Another thing that people miss out in a lot of contracts these days is the arbitration clauses.
Okay. So tell me more about that one.
So there is a difference between mediation and arbitration. I'm a mediator. I'm more of a fan of a mediation, right? Which is try to get the parties to a middle ground. The arbitration is a out-of-court, basically court case. That gets decided. Yeah, it's a dispute that is going to be almost as expensive as a trial. And many times, bigger companies push arbitration in their contracts because they don't have finality and they can stretch out the time, and people just don't have the money to do that.
To continue, yeah.
So it's
expensive. It's kind of a tactic to like to have you surrender. So it's going to be more expensive for me to pursue this than.
In my experience, and I'll give you an example that's of the art world. Many years ago, there was a whole analysis about how insurance companies put arbitration clauses with older clients because they wouldn't live all the way through the arbitrations.
Oh, wow.
Horribly brutal. It's brutal,
totally
right?
Crazy, yeah.
So it's better, I think, in my view, it's better to have your day in court and either you win or you don't, and you're done with the case, right? And sometimes you don't win, and that's okay. But at least you had your chance to try to prove your point. But if you have a contract, right, that's very, very important. That's why, going back to what we were talking about, what you review, what exactly are the terms of what is being offered? We will advertise this for you. We will have cocktail parties for you. We will do this, and then we will charge you 50%, not 60%. So it is very important to understand what it is that the offer is and what it is that you are accepting. Right. That's why the four corners are so important.
Right. So you advise, for example, in a practical way. So if an artist is going to be, getting into some sort of agreement with a gallery or another business or licensing or whatnot, to take that that agreement, let's say that they receive usually from the gallery or the business, and then take it to an attorney that can review it and help them out, find those things, what the red flags, what things that they need to know about it. Right.
Absolutely. And for I'll give you an example. So we'll review an agreement for $500, right? That's what we typically charge people if it's under, 45 pages. Because it takes about like a good 2 hours to sit there and do all this work and do comments, whatever, right? That's fairly reasonable, I think, for people. But there are people that say, no way, I'm not going to pay $500 for that, right?
Yeah.
Now, we typically, just so people, because I want to talk about money, because I think that sometimes people don't talk about money, right?
Right, I love that.
This is a make or break for people sometimes.
It's real.
So, yeah, we want to make it real. So, for example, when we design for an up-and-coming artist a simple contract, we charge them $1,500. This is the contract that once they pay it once, then they're going to recycle it.
Use, yeah.
And as issues come up, then we will adjust it, right? So, for example, with our companies that are like the modeling agencies that have models all over the U.S., we take the main contract and then we make adjustments because, as you said, each state has different laws. But that's because people are working in those states. In the case of an artist, you are selling a product. So it's a little bit different, right? So you can, quote unquote, domesticate it to your state and then kind of launch it out.
Okay.
So people should invest in that for themselves, right?
Right.
The licensing is very important, right? Licensing is extremely important, especially because I see people not collecting on their royalties.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. No, and usually in a case like that, the artist is at the mercy of whatever that business is doing behind the scenes, or they are the ones managing the contract and doing everything else. And a lot of times, it's language that is hard to understand, hard to figure out what this means or not. But, just because the artist wants to do it, they just sign it blindly and then there it goes. But there may be so many cases in which, they don't know exactly what they're giving away.
Right. One of the things in a licensing contract, or we're talking specifically about that I always look at is what is the percentage they're going to pay you, right? And when are they supposed to pay it? And what access do you have to review whatever books they have? Because you can put that in a contract. Like say, okay, I'll trust you, but I have a right quarterly or yearly to have an audit of your books. And you can have access to their books. You can put that in a contract. That's perfectly fair. To
make sure that you're getting your end of the deal. Exactly. Otherwise, how will you know?
Exactly. Most people don't do that, but just having it there is very important because then it kind of keeps people honest, right?
Absolutely. No, that is great. Now, in terms of, and there's all types of contracts, right? There's typically no one contract that covers it all. But so what are some of the, if you were to do a kind of itemized list, so what are some of the typical contracts that an artist might be, looking at? So you have the contract for, when you do business with a gallery, right? A license.
Right, of course.
A licensing contract.
A licensing contract. Well, first of all, well, let's start with the basic thing. You need to know what is it that you want to offer everybody, right?
Okay.
So if you have your own contract that you can offer the galleries, that's good, right? And then a licensing contract has completely different terminology, right?
Yeah.
One thing that all contracts have to have is protection of your intellectual property. You have to have a little something in there, right? And intellectual property gets very complicated because a lot of artists don't understand that the moment they create something, they own that intellectual property.
Right.
It doesn't have to be registered, right? Of course, if you have something that you're going to license, then it's good to spend that money to do whatever. I mean, it depends what you're making, right?
Right.
So every product requires different things. And the searches for whether this product already exists somewhere else can be expensive, right? Thousands of bucks to do and then to defend. So it can get very expensive very quick. And I'm mentioning this because a lot of people want to run out and just do all these things and register everything, and maybe they don't need to do all of that at the beginning.
Right.
But if they're going to do a massive deal where somebody's going to buy their product and license it and sell little keychains, and they could potentially make $100,000 worth of keychain sales, that's the moment where you definitely want to put that in a contract with that particular vendor.
Great.
Right? So definitely your intellectual property. The terms of the agreement always have to be very clear. What is the offer? What are they going to do for you? And what are you responsible for paying for in that deal, right? Because what I see a lot of people say, well, I was supposed to get 50%. Yeah, but there's another clause that says you're also responsible for all the expenses for all this other stuff. So they take your part and then they deduct that from there, and then you got 10%.
Right, exactly.
So those are, I think, when you're reviewing a contract for an artist, the artist needs to make sure that they understand exactly what it is that is being offered to them. They know what they are going to offer, right? You're going to pay me so much and I'm going to give you 10 paintings, right?
Right.
So I think that's not so much the issue. I think the other way around is the problem.
And I think that's what they said, right? The devil is in the details. So I guess for you guys as attorneys, you're searching for the devil when you're reviewing contracts.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Going after it. That is awesome. Now, it is very interesting, very fascinating. And I had also, when I started my gallery, that was kind of like the first thing we did, right? We had to go and make sure we get an LLC, we get all the paperwork, get it all right, so that when you start your business from the beginning, you are doing it right. Because it's a lot harder sometimes to go back and try to do it. So I'll do it later. I'm going to do it later. And then later years pass by, and then things can really have really repercussions. And, before this, I was talking about a friend of mine, who had that problem and never took care of his business. And then, he had some big problems later on. So I would guess also, or not I guess, but I would say that also, having a relationship with an attorney just like you, as an artist, where you start working with that person knows your business, and it's easier to continue that relationship of working as your business grows, continue growing in that relationship. Tell me a little bit about that too.
Well, I think that relationships are very important. I don't think that a lot of artists take the time. I think you're probably one of my few friends and clients, right, that will say, you know what, I'm doing this and I'm going to launch it and put in a lot of thought. And I hope you don't mind if we talk a little bit.
No, go ahead. I was going to talk about that too. Yeah. And I said, send you my contract so you can read it.
Right. So no, but it was interesting to see somebody who says, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to invest time and effort in designing this in such a way that it'll work for me and for what I want to do. Right. And then down the line that can change, and you can, but you need to have a team of people that at the very least you can call and say, hey, I have this issue. What do you think? Right. And you develop that relationship, and it has to be somebody who can help you in the moment. Right. It can't be just like I call the secretary and make an appointment and I'll meet with you in a week. And if you have an emergency, you have a deal that's coming through, you need to have access to somebody.
Absolutely.
And that comes from developing the personal relationship with a person. So I think people forget, when I give people my cell phone, I say, I take questions, but I also accept parties. Right? I say, you don't have to call me just for a problem. So that
you do show up to the parties. I can attest.
I do. I try to show up to the parties as well.
That's awesome. Well, Salvador, one last question I want to ask you, because I think it's also really important one. And as we were chatting, it just occurred to me, and then with this, we'll close it out. Because we also have, I want to say that we'll have the extended conversation also in the podcast. So if you are not subscribed to the podcast, make sure you find the Artist Next Level podcast and download it to your phone so you can listen to this whole conversation and others as well that are there, over 250 episodes already there. So, Sal, before we close down, I want to ask you, I think it's an important question that right now, particularly because of COVID and so many artists kind of going online and selling art now online, taking on their own, to sell art online. The clause that you have on a website of, if you're going to be selling art online, there are, also important clauses that you should have on your website. Tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, of, what are the terms of sale? Right.
Absolutely. And you're required, certain states require you to do this, right? So it's kind of like you need to have the terms of sale, and more importantly, right, the return policies, the exchange policies. Okay. Think of, and here's a very simple guide. Remember, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't. We look at form books, and then we take that, and then we work from there, and then we use our own experience, right? Yeah. And we tweak things. So there's nothing wrong with you looking, let's say, at a website from somebody who sells you clothes. What are their terms? If you were to buy a pair of pants that you didn't like, what would you do, right? Same with the art. Maybe you thought it's not big enough. I want something larger. I want to return this. What are the terms of that? Right. And you should, at this point in time, have a COVID-specific policy.
Oh, really? Okay.
Absolutely. And in the contracts, it's what we typically would call a force majeure clause or act of God clause, right? And let me mention something, because there may be some people listening that are having problems with the rent, right? Because this is the problem. If you own your own space, look in your contract. Unfortunately, a lot of people cannot pay their rent. Now, in Illinois, for example, we have a mandate from the governor that you cannot really evict people at this point in time. Right. But that's not going to stand forever, right? You're still going to owe all that rent that you didn't pay. So you need to have that conversation with your landlord. But when you have rental agreements for your galleries or for your workspace, you need to look at what are the dynamics of that. If I fall behind, how much time do I have? And for the website, right, there is this COVID thing saying we typically deliver the art within, I don't know, a month, for example, and to put in there. But, caveat, if there is a delay because the government cancels all the stuff over COVID, because if somebody's paying you $10,000 for a piece of art, they want it. They don't care, and those are the kind of people who might sue you if you don't deliver it, because you are breaking the contract, not them. You are the one who's. So if you right off the bat put in your contract and in your disclaimers in your website, hey, if any delays by COVID, you accept the terms. You know how when you go on a website and it has a bunch of legal jargon and it says, I accept, and nobody reads that? Right. That's where you put that.
Okay, exactly. There you go. And typically you will find it on a website at the footer, terms of sale, or, on the copyright information in there.
You should put that as a pop-up in between the offer and the payment.
Okay.
That would be my advice, because that way they check that they read it.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of they check back.
And if there's a dispute, then you have that to defend yourself in court. You say, listen, but nobody reads that. Well, that's your problem. You said right here, I accept the terms of sale, and the term was this. Exactly. So, so investing in that particular thing and updating that would be important.
Very cool. Well, Salvador, you've been super awesome like usual. And, you have, of course, helped me out so much, and also in some legal issues. And you've been great as well. So I want to thank you for that here personally as well, and publicly with everyone. And Salvador, I'm sure our friends now after this conversation, if they want to know more about your legal services, where can they find you as well? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, our website is cicerolawgroup.com. And they can always shoot me an email, sal@cicerolawgroup.com. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Or find me on Instagram at salcicero.
Yeah, exactly. You can find him there. You can find him playing his piano too once in a while.
Playing the piano and doing some legal things. Don't judge me too harshly. It's not the legal website, right?
Yeah, he's got a disclaimer even on Instagram.
Disclaimer, that's right.
Thank you, Salvador. And maybe in another day we talk about all these new also conversations about the usage of social media with your images and giving them permission to use their images and all these things that are kind of like they're being popping it up to say, reminding us this is what you have agreed to. Which is a whole other conversation, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. And how they shut you down if you put a video, you have to have permission, all of these things.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Salvador. Thank you for your time again. Super happy. Hopefully we get to see you again in another event here in Chicago, another party or some
Absolutely.
other.
Looking forward to it. Can't wait.
Thing. Exactly. And I hope it's for good reasons, right? So,
absolutely.
And our friends, please, if you enjoy this episode, share it with all your friends. Salvador and I will be so excited if you do that. I'm sure you have other artist friends who may be also kind of in the same boat, kind of trying to figure things out, how to navigate the legal things. This is a great episode, not only that is good right now, but it's good for a long, long time. Great advice that can help artists at all levels, not only emerging, but mid-career and established too. Sometimes, even if you've been doing this for a while, it's good to be reminded, right? Have those reminders of the things that we need to be doing to protect ourselves and our livelihoods and the art that we are leaving behind. So thank you so much. Thank you, Sal. Thanks to our friends. We'll see you.
Check out our website at www.theartistnextlevel.com, where you will find our podcast library, learn about our upcoming webinars, find resources relevant to your career, and much more. Thanks for listening to today's podcast, and we'll see you at the next level.